Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to uncover how the real-world friction of our daily lives, well, completely disrupts those sleek, traditional economic models we're so used to. We're venturing right into the messy, fascinating frontiers of microeconomics.
We often picture economics as this flawless machine. Those classic theories you learn in introductory courses, they all rely on this big assumption of perfect equilibrium, driven effortlessly by the famous invisible hand. But what actually happens when those perfect economic models collide with messy human reality? What happens when hidden information, political complexities, and our own human unpredictability cause those classic models to just completely glitch and fail? Well, that's exactly what we're tackling today.
To find out, here's our roadmap. We're going to look beyond traditional economics, tackle the information asymmetry problem, check out signaling and screening solutions, dive into the mathematics of voting, pit humans against econs, and finally, figure out how to navigate the real world with all this in mind.
All right, Section 1, Beyond Traditional Economics. Let's establish exactly why we desperately need to move past this myth of the perfect market.
Traditional economic models kind of assume a digital utopia, right? They operate on this fundamental premise that buyers and sellers just have perfect information about whatever they're trading. Plus, they assume we all engage in these flawless, mathematically optimal calculations 24/7. In theory, every time you buy a simple cup of coffee, you've instantaneously calculated the exact optimal utility of that purchase against literally every other possible purchase you could make in the universe. Crazy, right? But today, we're exploring the messy, unpredictable realities that complicate the whole shebang. Because let's be real, people almost never have all the facts, and honestly, even when we do have the facts, we definitely don't always act rationally.
Which brings us to Section 2, the information asymmetry problem. Let's see what happens when one person simply knows way more than another.
So, this information gap, or asymmetry, creates two massive problems in our markets: hidden actions and hidden characteristics. First up, consider moral hazard. This is all about hidden actions. It happens when one person, the agent, does a task for another person, the principal, but they can't be perfectly monitored. Think of an employee totally slacking off and playing solitary the absolute second the boss walks out of the room. Or, someone driving just a bit too fast on the highway simply because they know they've got top-tier comprehensive car insurance. Because the action is hidden, the behavior actually changes. Then, on the flip side, we have adverse selection. This one deals with hidden characteristics, where a seller fundamentally knows way more about a product's true quality than the buyer does. The absolute classic example here is the used car market. Imagine you're buying a used car. You're probably terrified of getting a lemon, a car with hidden defects that only the current owner knows about. So naturally, you lower the maximum price you're willing to pay, just to play it safe. But here's the kicker. Because all buyers are doing this, the owners of truly high-quality used cars can't get a fair price, so they just pull their cars off the market entirely. Suddenly, the market is completely dominated by lemons, all because of that one little information gap.
Moving on to Section 3, signaling and screening solutions. Since this asymmetry causes our markets to glitch, society had to engineer some pretty clever workarounds.
Markets actually respond to these gaps dynamically, using two really distinct strategies. The first is signaling. Signaling is when the informed party takes a deliberate, costly action just to prove their quality to the uninformed party. A perfect example, a student spending 4 long years and thousands of dollars to earn a rigorous college degree. Now, the degree itself might not perfectly align with the daily tasks of the job they end up applying for, but it credibly reveals their high caliber to an employer. Why? Because a less capable worker simply wouldn't be able to afford the time, the effort, or the money to fake that signal. On the other hand, we have screening. This is when the uninformed party proactively forces the truth out. Think of a super cautious buyer demanding a used car be checked by an independent mechanic before they even think about handing over their cash. Or an insurance company demanding your complete medical history and a full physical exam before selling you a life insurance policy. They're screening you, pulling back the curtain to protect themselves from those hidden characteristics we just talked about.
Let's actually take this a step further into our personal lives. Think about the economics of gift giving. Now, purely economically speaking, handing someone raw cash is the single most efficient way to maximize their utility. With cash, they can buy exactly what they want. Zero dead weight loss. But imagine handing your partner a stack of $20 bills for your anniversary. Yeah, they would probably be deeply, profoundly offended. And why is that? Because taking the time to research, hunt down, and purchase a really thoughtful, specific gift, that is a costly signal. It proves you have private information. It shows your deep knowledge of their tastes and your affection for them. Handing over cash? Well, that just signals that you didn't even bother to try.
All right, shifting gears to Section 4, the mathematics of voting. We're moving from market imperfections to the mathematical flaws of government itself. So imagine a town is voting on 3 different options for a new project: option A, option B, and option C. In a perfect, entirely logical world, if society as a whole prefers A over B and they also prefer B over C, logic dictates they absolutely must prefer A over C, right? That fundamental concept is called transitivity. But here is where it gets wild. Through something called the Condorcet paradox, pairwise majority voting can actually lead to a completely illogical, looping contradiction. Depending on the mix of voter preferences in this town, it is mathematically possible to have a scenario where the majority votes for A over B, the majority votes for B over C, and yet the majority also votes for C over A. It literally forms an endless loop of contradictions. This is absolutely crucial because it means the order in which a mayor or a committee chair presents the votes, their agenda-setting power, can entirely determine the final outcome. It's totally independent of what the actual objective will of the majority might be.
Building on this exact paradox, Nobel Prize-winning economist Kenneth Arrow took things a massive step further. He mathematically proved that no matter what democratic voting system a society adopts, it will always be inherently flawed. He laid out 4 basic criteria for a fair voting system. First, unanimity. If everyone prefers A over B, A should win. Makes sense. Second, transitivity, which we just talked about. Third, independence of irrelevant alternatives, meaning the ranking between A and B shouldn't randomly change just because a third option C enters the mix. And finally, the absence of a dictator. Well, Arrow proved conclusively that it is mathematically impossible to have a voting system that guarantees all 4 of these criteria at the same time. This is known as Arrow's impossibility theorem, and it's a profound, almost philosophical realization, isn't it? Just as markets are imperfect at allocating resources, democratic voting is mathematically imperfect at aggregating society's true preferences. A perfect system simply doesn't exist. But despite Arrow's theorem, we do still largely use majority rule. So how do politicians actually behave in this imperfect system? They target the middle. Because democratic outcomes naturally gravitate to the center to secure that majority, a politician is almost always going to target the median voter's preference to win an election. Take a look at this scenario of a town voting on a fireworks budget. The voters want either $0, $10,000, or $30,000 spent. That $10,000 option right in the middle, that's the sweet spot. It pulls in the moderate voters, captures the center, and ultimately wins the majority. This brilliantly explains why, especially in a 2-party system, competing political platforms so often move closer and closer to the center of the political spectrum during a general election. Moving to the extremes loses the median voter. And let's face it, losing the median voter means losing the whole election.
Which brings us to Section 5, Humans versus Econs. This is where we encounter the ultimate glitch in classical economic theory: us. See, classic economics is built for this fictional species called Homo economicus, or as behavioral economists playfully like to call them, econs. These are emotionless, hyper-rational, calculating machines. Literally, just think of Mr. Spock from Star Trek. If we were all econs, we would always maximize our utility flawlessly. But real humans, we aren't like that at all. We are driven heavily by our sense of fairness. Did you know we'll sometimes reject a financial offer that actually puts money in our pocket simply because we feel the other person is getting an unfairly large cut? We're also heavily influenced by our immediate emotions. And crucially, we exhibit deep inconsistency over time. Think about it. You are the exact same person who highly motivates yourself to set an alarm for a 6 a.m. gym session, but you're also the person who smashes the snooze button 3 times the next morning. Econs do not hit snooze. Humans definitely do.
Finally, Section 6, Navigating the Real World. Let's tie all these frontiers back to your daily life.
The broad takeaway from this explainer is that the flawless, elegant, mathematical model of classical economics, it's really just a starting point, a baseline. Out here in the real world, there are limits to perfection everywhere you look. Markets are fundamentally flawed because buyers and sellers rarely have the exact same information when making a transaction. Governments, as we saw with Arrow's theorem and the wild mathematics of voting, they're imperfect institutions that genuinely struggle to reliably and fairly fix those failing markets. And finally, the very actors functioning within this entire massive system, you and me, are beautifully imperfect, emotionally driven, and frequently irrational decision makers. So I'll leave you with this final provocative thought. Our world operates on economic and political systems designed for hyper-rational econs. Yet those systems are populated entirely by, well, us. So the next time you have to make a financial decision, whether you're cautiously screening a used car, voting in a highly contested local election, or deciding whether to buy a thoughtful anniversary gift or just hand over cash, take a second to ask yourself, Are you actually acting like Mr. Spock right now? Or are you just being a delightfully messy, irrational human? Thanks for exploring the frontiers of microeconomics with me. Keep questioning the models and keep learning.